Boker Tov, Talmidim v'Chavarim. Good morning, my students and friends. I'm here for yet another uh, Heartfelt Haftarah. So, where are we? We are in the book of Numbers, and our Torah portion is Matot. And in fact, I'm not even going to mention what this is in Matot because the reality is that there is no intrinsic association between the Torah portion and the Haftarah. That's because we are now in the 3 weeks of distress or the 3 weeks of straits in which we contemplate the destruction of Jerusalem. It will culminate in Tisha B'av. And during this 3 weeks, we are given three haftorot telling us we're pretty awful and that terrible consequences come to terrible people. So these haftorot are selected for their negative message, not because they have any intrinsic connection to the Torah portion. On that cheerful note, there's a little more consolation to it than that, but let's start with 10 peg business. So we now find ourselves in the book of Jeremiah. Jeremiah is one of the big three of the latter prophets, the major prophets, because of the size of the writing. Of course, we're talking about Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. Jeremiah is sufficiently distressing that with his messages that it has given us the English word Jeremiah, a ranting or a harsh critique. And Jeremiah is famous for this. So, who is Jeremiah? He is a prophet in the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom has already been destroyed by the Assyrians, and now the southern kingdom is being menaced by the successor empire to the Assyrians, which is the Neo-Babylonians. And it is clear that the small, relatively poor mountain state of Judah, which avoided being invaded when the northern kingdom was destroyed, is now in danger. And the leadership of Jerusalem and Judah don't really seem to have a good handle on what they're doing. And from Jeremiah's perspective, the biggest problem is that the people lack moral strength to withstand the threat of this empire. And as a result, they're relying on political machinations that probably aren't going to save them. In particular, the king and the leadership of Jerusalem are appealing to the Egyptians in the hopes that they will be a great power that will help shield them. Jeremiah doesn't believe this is going to work for a moment, and what the nation needs is a sense of moral purpose and direction, and is highly critical of that. So, going to put this away, and we're going to talk a little bit about the portion. So, the selected part is actually the first and second chapters of Jeremiah, and it is the summons of Jeremiah by God. It tells the story of how Jeremiah, a minor priest in Jerusalem, almost all the southern prophets were also priests, uh, gets the call from God and told that he is going to be a spokesperson for whatever message God has to the people. Jeremiah, like all prophets, not happy in being singled out for this. He does not consider this an honor. In particular, he makes a point of talking about how young he is and how he really isn't qualified to speak to kings and princes and generals and tell them that they're getting it wrong. But God insists. And then God provides Jeremiah with a couple of visions. Now, this is one of the earliest moments where we get prophetic visions. I think I've mentioned in the past that prophets, historically, at least in the literature up until this moment, generally experience auditions. They hear God addressing them. But here we see an example, or two examples actually, where Jeremiah sees a vision and then God calls upon him to interpret it. And he is able to do that, which also demonstrates that he's going to be just fine as a prophet. So we have a vision of an almond tree with its branches, and then there's a vision of a pot of boiling water that pours out from the north, which pretty obvious is meant to represent the imminent threat of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And so Jeremiah starts an oracle telling the people how terrible they are, how wrong they are, and they need to get right with God. Now, what actually happens is the rabbis, the rabbis are softies. And even though this is supposed to be a message of criticism, critique, condemnation, which it is, uh, they go on to chapter 2. They add like a few verses from chapter 2 at the end because there are more cheerful things being said there. And actually, that's where I want to go because there's a couple of beautiful turns of phrase and an important idea that appears in Jeremiah and will repeat itself a number of times. So let's hear what's going on in chapter 2. Uh, the word of the Eternal came to me, saying, Go cry out to the people of Jerusalem. Thus says the Eternal One. This is God speaking now. I remember the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me in the wilderness, in a land not sown. So, whatever the moral state or moral collapse of the people now, God still has an affectionate memory of us when we wandered in the desert under God's protection. And the image being offered here is that of a husband and his wife, remembering their honeymoon, as it were. This image of uh, divine relationship as imagined as a love relationship is something that will reoccur several times in Jeremiah. And actually, some of the rhetoric he uses will end up becoming part of the Jewish wedding ceremony. So, repurposed entirely different circumstances from the criticisms, the Jeremiads that Jeremiah is currently offering the people, and recast as a symbol of love, both human love and divine human love. And it then goes on with a couple more lines. For Israel is holy to the eternal, the first fruit of God's harvest. All who eat it shall bear their guilt. Ill shall befall them, says the eternal one. Now, that's a little subtle, not sure what's going on there. I'll explain it to you in the context Jeremiah is using symbolism from the agrarian world in which the Israelites live. So, the system that we inherit from the Torah is that whenever fruit being vegetables of any sort, any grown materials, first sprout, the first fruits, that is the first mature things that bud or grow out of the ground, have to be dedicated to God. You can't eat them. You have to turn them over to the temple where they feed the priests. They're used in sacrifices, and a portion of them are donated to the poor. So the point being that you cannot benefit from the first fruits. So when God, in the metaphor, says Israel is holy to the eternal, the first fruit of God's harvest, what he's saying is, look it, even if you are afflicted, and even if more powerful nations come against you, if they bite the apple that is the people Israel, it's gonna turn back on them. They will bear guilt for afflicting you, and you should know that in the end, because you are holy people, you are God's first fruits, God will save you in the end, and anyone who torments you will be divinely punished. So it's an odd image for us, but does have that sense of there may be consequences for the people, but in the end, God will not give up on us. We are God's special chosen people, and we will not be abandoned. So that is, as I said, strangely retro agrarian way, God reassuring the people that even if difficulties beset them, a tragedy comes to the kingdom of Judea, the Neo Babylonians are able to afflict them, that they should not give up hope. And I think that's a fairly good message for the 3 weeks of distress when we imagine the traumas that our people have suffered in the past. And with the reflection of history, we can realize that we survived them, overcame them, and we continue to thrive despite them. And so we can look in retrospect and see that maybe we are God's first fruits. All right, that's it for this week, and I will bring you 2 more weeks of bad news in the Haftarot, but hopefully there will be some message of consolation in all of that. Take care until next week.